My name is Eddy Webb. I'm a content designer on the World of Darkness MMO, which means that this is now the third time I've given this presentation, the third time I've had a different title each time I've given the presentation. This is Your Game Sucks. This is a study of live-action playstyles, specifically live-action large-scale LARPs. And so the first question that you have when you talk about what the playstyles for a live-action game, the theory of that was why bother? I mean, it's a lot of theory and it doesn't help me with my game. Well, there's a lot of reasons. One of which is that there really isn't a lot of serious evaluations of large-scale live-action role-play dynamics. There's lots of studies of role-playing games, lots of studies of video games, but not of this particular culture, and it has some unique qualifications and challenges that not been a lot of studied towards. Conflicts in playstyles between players isn't a unique problem, and that's something that live-action games can learn from other forms of interactive entertainment that actually have studied this problem and come to some solutions. And vice versa, other large-scale games like MMOs can actually learn something from the dynamics that are inherent to live-action games and use that to help inform their own design. And interestingly, even though Justin and I had no coordination on these presentations, you'll see a lot of the stuff that I talk about here referencing or at least reinforcing some of the stuff Justin talked about in the last presentation. So there are some disclaimers first. The goal of doing this, as I've done every year, is to get the most people to have the most fun. I like talking about theory, but I always believe that theory should ultimately leave a practical purpose, and so the goal of this is to come up with some practical ways that you can think about things, or at least to start having a conversation with people. These are all my personal theories. Just because I get paid to think about this stuff, it just means I'm a big nerd, doesn't mean I'm actually right or better. I spend a lot of time studying this and talking with people about these things, but you may have different perspectives and different opinions, and I always love having conversations about this because each year I have a chance to refine these theories and help them expand and grow. This is biased towards my personal experiences with large-scale LARPs. Most of my experience is primarily through the Camarilla/Mind's Eye Society. I've recently started playing in One World by Night so I can expand that experience. And I've talked to a lot of people over the years who have also played in these style of games, but certainly, like any kind of thing, this is going to be biased towards my personal experiences in these kinds of games. And really, as I mentioned, this is a chance to think critically about your opinions, even if you don't agree with mine. My hope is that if you start going, well, no, Eddie's an asshole and he's wrong because of blah, 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 you've started thinking about this and you started really digging into what this can or can't be for you. As you go into playstyles, one of the things to really keep in mind is that these things I'm talking about, they're analytical tools. This isn't a gamer personality test where you can put people into a box and they'll stay in that box forever. They're not always going to be a fighter. They're not always going to be a cleric. These are tools that you can use to actually study how people play the games. And as a result of that, players are going to fall into multiple categories, and they will fall into multiple categories, especially over a period of time. The closer you get to studying players from like a moment-to-moment session, people will fluctuate between playstyles. It's only when you get to a larger scale, they start to net out to a particular playstyle, but it's people are very fluid in what they find enjoyable, what the rewards they're getting from, and what they're enjoying. Sometimes you just want to kick down a door and kill an orc, and that's just how people are. Other times you really want to dress up in an amazing costume. That doesn't mean you've suddenly inherently changed what kind of player you are. It just means you've flowed through. And as I mentioned, this is really designed to examine trends. This is not meant to give people a camp that they can then fight to the death for. You fall into this one category, so therefore you must always be this way and you will always do this. It's really more along the lines of saying, people seem to enjoy playing this way, these people seem to enjoy playing this way, what can we do to help them get more fun and get better rewards? So as a portion of this, when I first started putting this together, I looked to previous existing playstyle models to help me to kind of form my own ideas about how those apply to live action games specifically. There's some academic shit involved here. I'm going to try to keep it down as much as I can. But because there are a lot of playstyle models, as you start digging in, you'll see many, many, many people have lots of opinions on what people's playstyles are and how they relate. So I'm going to look at only 4 of those, covering a variety between tabletop role-playing games, online games, and actually one live-action role-play dynamic. So the first one is actually a Dungeons & Dragons survey that was done by Wizards of the Coast in 1999. They were putting this together as there were putting the design touches on 3rd edition D&Ds. They're trying to get a sense of why people play D&D and how they can make a game system that will actually appeal to those players. And they came up with 4 different distinctions for their survey. The first is the thinker. These are people who like to actually min-max and solve puzzles. They want to actually figure out how things work and make those work to the maximum efficiency. There are power gamers who actually enjoy intense gaming experiences, and they may disregard the storyline implications of their actions. They're really more for the big thrill and being the big badass. There are the character actors who enjoy fully expressing their character, and they make suboptimal choices for their quote-unquote correct motivations. And finally, there's the storyteller, those who find enjoyment in the progression of a narrative, and they look for non-rules answers to the inconsistencies that come up in the game world. And a caveat I have to this particular survey is I find all of these to be extremely loaded language, but it is one of the better examples of a game company who went out to find out what players want and attempted to quantify it. So I don't agree with a lot of how they phrase things here, but it is worth noting this is a key mark shift in how people perceived players inside of the tabletop community. Next is the big model, another extremely controversial playstyle model. This was done by Ron Edwards and is sometimes called GNS theory. But Ron Edwards determined that there were 3 kinds of creative agendas, as he called them, 3 different ways that people design and play games that are based around what he called elements of exploration. And those elements of exploration are things like character, setting, the flavor and color for a particular game world, and the system and situation. These are things that players dig into and explore during the course of a role-playing game, and how they relate to those elements is where the creative agendas come from. And the first one is simulationism, so that these elements of exploration are actually things unto themselves. I play the game because I enjoy playing with the system. I play the game because I enjoy the setting. And so the act of playing the game itself and exploring these things are its own reward for simulationism. Gamism is where the elements of exploration are an arena for players to test themselves against each other or test themselves against the environment. So the setting, the characters, these are ways that I can actually prove myself and either succeed or fail and get recognition for that success or failure. And finally, there's narrativism, where the elements of exploration are used to create a story that address a premise. So we use the setting and character to explore a certain theme, and we may disregard or modify those tools if they're not suited towards the exploration of that theme. This is a very commonly referenced a theory in the indie RPG scene, although it has lost a lot of favor in the past couple of years for other new and shinier models. Third is the Bartle test that actually Justin mentioned in his last presentation. There have been a million variations of this, some of which by Dr. Bartle himself. But the original one was a 1996 study of multi-use dungeon players with a precursor to our current MMOs. And he came up with 4 groups, the Achievers, who really focused on raising level as their main goal. They want to progress. They want to be seen as progressing, and that is why they play the game. The Explorers, those who actually enjoy having the game expose its components to them. I want to play through the game because I want to see what's around the next corner. I want to see what happens when I mix these 2 things together. The Socializers, the people who log in primarily to talk to people and see what they have to say and to watch what they're doing. Simultaneously, a conversationalist and audience for the other players in the game. And finally, there are Killers, those that actually get their kicks off of imposing themselves on others. And it doesn't actually always have to be combat-oriented. Sometimes just telling someone, lol, noob, you suck at this game, here's how you play, can be just as much imposing as just killing their character and getting their rocks off that way. So as I mentioned, there's been a lot of expansions and refutations. Nick Yee is probably one of the more relevant refutations of this model. But in general, this model comes up a lot in MMO design as well. So it's respected or at least well acknowledged inside the video game industry. And finally, there are venue style sheets that Mind's Eye Society, the Camarilla, uses. And the Camarilla really had an idea of trying to find a way to boil down what their game is about, so visitors, when they come to play the game, can get a sense of what to expect. And so they tried to define the gameplay styles to these outside groups in across 8 categories. And that's action, character developments, darkness, drama, intrigue, manners, mystery, and pace. And one of the downsides of this particular model is that you have these 8 words with a number of 1 to 5 associated with them, and so it became a lot of what does 5 pace mean? What does 1 character development mean? And so in general, it kind of aggregated towards 3s. Yeah, Justin?
Do you end up, I haven't used this system before, do you end up with a kind of like circle drawn within the axes there? Or are these kind of trying to push levers to one side or the other? Do you end up with like a Bartle graph? Or like a plot based on it?
How they've generally been used, the idea was more what you're saying, yes. It's like going, okay, well, I know I like games with strong darkness, so I'm going to look through and say, okay, these games also have strong darkness, so I'm going to check those out. What really happened is that a lot of people didn't seem to understand what these things really meant, and so they tried to play it safe. It's like, well, let's call this a 3 and call that a 3, and so you have these 2 sides ultimately aggregate towards a lot of 3s, because I didn't want to piss off the people who really like, this guy really wants drama, so we don't have a lot of drama in our game, but I don't want to tell people that because I want people to come visit, so I'm going to say my drama's a 3, even if the game actually had maybe a 1 or a 2. And also, how the system in the Onyx Society worked is that they would put the venue style sheet together and then submit it before the players even started playing the game, and then often they would not go back to revise it. So it became what the storyteller and players thought their game was going to be, but then what the game actually turned into may not reflect on the sheets. So the sheets became increasingly inaccurate and also were very kind of more PR than an actual assessment of the game. But it was interesting because it was the first time I'd seen a live action game try to advertise to other people this sort of game's about on a quantitative level, as opposed to kind of hand-wavy, there's some politics and there's some print stuff. So it was an interesting attempt, even though the application wasn't very valid. Yeah.
Would it make more sense to have the players evaluate the game at systematic times of the year?
Yes, actually it would. And I do go into a little bit in that later, but something that actually this Anti-Society have tried to put forward, like, hey, every 3 months, 6 months, you should revise this. And some people really gravitated to that. I know that times I've run games, I was very kind of proactive in saying, where do you guys think we are now? And kind of doing that. But again, if you do a pure voting system, you're going to aggregate to 3s again, just because law averages, you're going to get lots of like 2.5s and 3.7s as opposed to stronger numbers. But on the other side, did have the secondary and I think stronger benefit of the players thinking about what they're actually doing in the game. So while it did not help in the outside-facing this is what our game's about, it did help internally saying, we're actually talking and thinking about what our game is and what we want in our game. So there is some value to that conversation, even if the actual design goal wasn't really relevant. So those are the models, some of the models that I had looked at as we talked things through, and also some of the models that have existed before. And so from that and my personal experiences, I've come up with 4 proposed archetypes of playstyles for players in these kinds of live-action games. And the first are actors. These are players that, for them, the game is primarily a method for portraying a particular character. They have crafted a particular persona in their head, and they want to portray that persona to the maximum effort. So for them, that character-driven roleplay is the most important thing. That's the reward they get out of playing the game. On the flip side, they may find that out-of-game or OOC interactions may be disruptive to their ability to internalize and project this particular persona. And they may also become attached to that personal story, that particular way they need a character to go, regardless of what the other players are experiencing or interacting with on that level. This is probably similar to the big model simulationism, as well as the D&D character actor, but there are lots of other notes in the other models. With the actor archetypes on it's pretty common. Yeah.
Also, Bachmann's immersionism, which is a Scandinavian version of the big model that talks about immersionism as a...
Yeah, actually, the actor play style is actually pretty common in a lot of Nordic LARPs because they're really about trying to craft a very specific experience and allow an experience to be persistent. And so in a lot of Nordic LARP styles, there won't be an out-of-character element to prevent that particular out-of-character disruption. There won't be a lot of ramrodding of a particular plot line. It's wherever your character goes in the next 48 hours, that's up to you. So yeah, certainly the Nordic LARP scene have identified that this is the kind of game we have to play, and so they've adjusted their play style to perhaps almost an extreme level of the actor stance. Absolutely. Another one is cultivators. For cultivators, the game is primarily a method to improve their character and then to demonstrate that improvement and that mastery of mechanics. So as a result, naturally, mechanical development is going to be the most important thing for them out of the game. They also will tend to rely on mechanical interaction as a result. And in a lot of role-playing game designs, combat is usually the most detailed mechanical interaction. So combat's probably going to be the one they rely on the most because it's the mechanical interaction they can get their grasp on the most and has the most impact on players around them. And they may also find that non-mechanical interactions are somehow unfair. If I can talk you out of doing something and I don't have to bid a social trait or use my social powers, it's not fair that you're using your out-of-game player skill to infect my in-game character. I have these dots that tell me you can't do that, but yet this roleplay moves things in certain directions. So they may feel that that relationship is inherently unfair because the mechanics aren't being relied upon. This is very strongly big model gameism, as well as the D&D power gamer. And actually, I want to take a digression from this because I've been giving this presentation a couple of times, and I've become, as a result, kind of a cultivator apologist because I inherently believe that being a cultivator is not a bad play style. And a lot of times I've kind of hedged around saying not all play styles are bad, they can all be good or bad. And so let me just put out and say that cultivators are not power gamers. And you could be a cultivator and be a positive influence in your game without necessarily being a power gamer. And there's nothing shameful in being a cultivator and enjoying mechanical actions. Like I said earlier, sometimes you want to kick down the door and beat up some orcs, and that's perfectly okay. And enjoying that thrill of mastering the system and getting some control over your environment, your fictional environment, is rewarding and awesome. So certainly should enjoy that if you get into that.
Are cultivators also, I guess, rules lawyers?
That is one negative permutation of cultivator, but that goes into the unfair relationship. It's like, the rules should fit together this way. I have mastered the rules to fit together this way, and now you're telling me that my understanding is no longer valid. You are now invalidating my mastery. So I feel that is unfair because I have, in my head, understood the rules this way. So that's where the rules lawyer instinct comes from, is that I want to make sure that my interpretation, my mastery of this system is predominant and therefore I can reinforce my mastery of it. But there are, again, lots of positive ways that can be discussed. It's like, how does this benefit our game? It's like, these rules seem to be really broken. A good example of this is for playtesting. When I worked on Mind's Eye Theater, The Awakening, I specifically went to the rules lawyers I knew and said, here's my design, break this as much as you can. And a lot of times they would come back to things like going, okay, it's actually possible if you do this math this way, you can destroy the Earth. Which actually led to an entire sidebar in that book going, don't put that thing on my planet, because I'm like, this is how bad it can get. Don't let your players do this. And so there are ways that cultivators can actually go, guys, this is going in a bad direction. Why don't we bring it back this way? Because if we change the rules in this direction, it may make us have a stronger, better experience. So again, cultivators can be a really strong, positive force for a game if directed in the right channel.
From what I'm hearing you say, with the rules lawyer problem, if this system is broken in this particular way,
Mm-hmm.
you can destroy the Earth or purple or whatever it is. It sounds like the math and the systems balancing that goes behind the game is almost afterthought is a little bit too strong of a word, but it doesn't seem like it's as core to the design of the game as it could be.
That's a bit of a misnomer, because when you're designing a game, each game designer has their kind of idealized experience in their head when they're making the game. It's like, and this is probably how the game's going to be played. And as you get more and more bitter as a game designer, you realize, okay, this is probably how it's actually going to be played, so I should probably design for that, the way it's really being played. But still, it's their perception of that experience. And so when you bring that game to your house and you start opening it up, you have a wildly different expectation out of that game. So it's not that these things, we don't care about game balance or we don't care about design. We do care a lot as we make these games. But what that means to you versus what that means to me is very different. So game designers are weird because we're the only designers in the world that are making the product at a remove. I mean, every designer, if I make a teapot and I give you a teapot, you get the teapot exactly as it was envisioned. I'm making something that you then have to implement. It's a bit more like an IKEA set. It's like, here's all the stuff, and you put it together, and you could put it together in this way that I envisioned, but you can also put it together in a very different way that may or may not be related. And so it's like, while this IKEA set, when I put these shelves in different configurations, it's not as stable, so obviously I should have accounted for that. And that's not really valid because we didn't anticipate that particular thing. But to take that digression, from my digression, that's where things like the open development process for V20 and Werewolf 20 have been extremely valuable because we can kind of listen to people saying, this is how we're using this experience, this is how we're using these systems, and we can address those kind of points and elements and give a more robust answer. But still, even then, there's still going to be someone who picks up the book a year and a half later and goes, oh, well, I really thought integration worked this way, and it doesn't.
Well, what I was trying to get at, and I thank you for that answer, I wasn't trying to say that game balance is disregarded, and that it was not important to game planners. What I was thinking of was more like, from my own experience when I was working with Peter Molyneux on Black and White 2. I don't know if you played that or not.
Oh, yeah.
But some of the ideas behind it were, say, okay, you can be a god of war or you can be a god of peace.
Right.
The amount of resources or activities that you have to engage in order to be a peaceful god are far greater than what the person who gets to be an enemy god has to do in order to achieve what they want. So the balancing behind that, I thought, was...
Oh, I see what you're saying, right? The environment's rules versus the player rules?
Right.
Okay, that's a slightly different thing, and certainly that could be where a cultivator can get frustrated, because it's like, on my sheet this works this way, why aren't the NPCs working by the same rules? And certainly that can be a playstyle challenge, is if the storyteller is very much along the lines of, there needs to be badasses, so this guy's going to whoop your ass because that's what this game needs, the cultivators could be like, oh no, I know how this math works, and you can't possibly do that. So certainly at an application level, and certainly in some game designs, that playstyle may not find that to be enjoyable, because it's like, the game cheats, basically is what that boils down to. It's like, this is bullshit, the game's cheating. A good example from my personal experience is I played the Magic the Gathering app on my iPad, and I was playing with a friend of mine. Yeah, it's a slow card game, you may not have heard of it. But a friend of mine who's been playing Magic for years was playing it, and he was just breaking down like, this is how these cards shouldn't work this way, and how he gets his presentation, and just all the numbers behind why the card shouldn't work that way on the computer's end, ergo the computer cheats. And me, on a slightly more kind of casual way of playing a game, it's just like, it's hard, but I mean, I didn't really think of it as broken, but he had mastered the dynamics and the math behind how Magic the Gathering works, and so when the computer game didn't conform to that expectation, he felt that the game was flawed and didn't get enjoyment out of it. So that is a valid point. So the application of the design, and also even to a certain extent the design, if the rules are different on both sides, that can be a problem. Yeah.
This is just on the subject of actors versus cultivators.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed a lot with World of Darkness and all of its incarnations, there are set mechanics for social, well, particularly social interaction, where a cultivator can come in and not be a good social player, not be a strong personality, but they write a character that's got the ability to do that, and the actors won't recognize that due to the fact that they're not doing game mechanics, they're doing... Do you have any suggestions on how to...
Yeah, I do go a little bit more into that later, but that actually, you've nailed a lot of where I see that kind of conflict happening is the actor is... I don't really care what your sheet says. I want you to roleplay that. I want to feel the experience of you telling me, talking me down, or that experience of the prince growling in my face. I want to feel that. Right. Whereas the cultivator is like going, I want to show that I have particularly crafted this social character so that I have the right stats and mechanics to show that I'm contributing to the game because of my mastery of the social mechanics. Right. So it's cool that you're growling in my face, but when are we going to get to the rock, paper, scissors so I can demonstrate that I actually have the better mechanics?
Well, I've also seen LARPs as kind of a revenue for people who haven't developed social skills as a way to kind of get out of their shell and do so.
Sure.
And they kind of start out as a cultivator to do that because they don't have the social mastery as a person to act the part out.
And that's where mastery kind of takes a different track, is that not all of these mastery elements, these rewards necessarily come from the mechanics of the system. I was one of those guys. I came into the game and I leaned on the social mechanics to make me kind of come out of my shell. And then over time, I got more comfortable just portraying that, and my stance slid towards actor more because I really got genuine enjoyment of, I figured out this talking to people thing, how it works. Public speaking is the same way. It's like, I was terrified of public speaking when I first started, but I've done it so many times now, it's like I've got the point where it's like, I actually kind of can't get up to wait to talk to people because I like the fact that I have this skill now that I didn't have before. Right. So certainly it extends beyond that, and you can kind of be a critical cultivator of real life skills as well. These things are not, it's also more about psychology, but I mean, for the day-to-day LARP concerns a lot more based around there's this explicit external mechanical system that I have mastery of and I want to demonstrate that versus people who use the mechanical system as a guideline for how they envision the game going.
In relation to what you just said, there you are. You were talking about how a player who might say have minimal social skills suddenly decides to load up on charisma and manipulation.
Right.
And for the purposes of this game, they are making a social character, but they, as a player, don't have the necessary skills as a human being to back that up. What that, I think, very interestingly entails or requires, since you're talking about that player eventually moving out of their shell and developing as a player, they get to spend their, player XP to raise their own charisma. That requires the interaction of a detailed or involved group and storyteller in order to bring that about. It wouldn't just happen as a result of playing the game.
Right, and my personal feelings on it have been that it's the actors, the good actors, have a responsibility to kind of accommodate what's on the character sheet and react to them as if that the player was playing the character on the sheet.
Absolutely. And I actually go into some of the actual application of it a little bit later, but that's a very good point.
This actually came up in the focus group that's being running yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about bleed in and bleed out. A lot of people taking stuff socially. Yeah, some people doing, having their social, their real life stuff coming in, and then the way they were also acting with other players.
Right.
They let their characters kind of be informed by their choices in real life, like, oh, that guy slept with my girlfriend. Even though we're supposed to be working together, I hate him. So I'm gonna.
Right.
I'm not gonna care about the rules.
Bleeding through the liminal space, yeah. Absolutely, and that's another big factor. Okay. So the third type are fixers. Getting a little bit away from this section. Fixers are those for which the game is a method to find and solve problems. Problems that could be mechanical or that can be inherent to the game world. And so for them, finding those challenges and engaging with them is the most important thing. It, again, goes back to that flow that Jess was talking about, trying to find that sweet spot but constantly ride it, because that's where they find their particular enjoyment. And so stories that don't have challenges can be seen as boring, and they may decide to create challenges so that to bring what they can. This game's boring, so I'm going to liven it up and make it fun by blowing some shit up, because that's what they find fun. So that's how they express fun, by creating challenges. And vice versa is if the challenges are way too difficult, they may become frustrated because it's too far on the other side. It's like, I keep banging my head against this wall, I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere, so what's the point? This ties into the D&D model of the Thinker, as well as Bartle's Explorer, because the challenge of opening the environment up and seeing what it's about is key to what they find to be fun. And finally, the socialites. This is, for them, the game is about being social and making friends. So as a result, costuming and socialization, both inside the game and outside in the game, is the most important element. It's the most important thing for them in playing the game. And as a result, they may fall out of the game pretty easily if they find that this new person they're talking to has a really interesting job. They'll just drop out of game and go off and talk that person out of game and screw the game, because now what I want out of this game, I'm getting from this avenue unrelated to the game we're playing. And they may also bend their character concept or scrap it entirely on a whim and make a new character in order to try out new costumings or to engage in a new social group. Because again, what they're really getting is a dynamic of talking to people and expressing themselves visually in new ways. This is one that's actually fairly unique to large-scale games. You don't see this a lot in other styles of interactive game. Bartle's Socializer is probably the closest to this, but even then it's not quite a map. It's something that's pretty unique to live-action games because of the unique dynamic of physically talking to lots of different people simultaneously. So a special case with this is assholes. Asshole is not a playstyle, no matter what Justin tells you.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, it's not a playstyle. Going back to my cultivator digression, any playstyle can have you an asshole in disguise. The socializer that tells you, oh God, is that really all you can afford? That's just as much an asshole as the guy who kills your character because he's bored. So it's really more, if someone's trying to impose a playstyle or judgment on a playstyle on somebody else, that's the asshole. And also that's where a lot of the conflicts in playstyles start to really arise, is when someone says, well, this is how it's really played, not this is how I enjoy playing. And there is some overlap to MMO griefers or internet trolls, and specifically the kind of tactics they use to provocate. You see a lot of that in griefing and trolls. So I have all this great theory. I have my personal opinions on 4 different groups of styles. What does this actually mean to our game? We touched on some of these points, but there are different ways that you can actually apply this to your game. The first way to do that is to actually determine what you like. Write an honest list of the things that you like and dislike about your game. I've found in the past that abstract lists of I like games with this and that aren't helpful. Looking at the game you're playing now and saying, I'm enjoying this, I am not enjoying that, putting something a little more concrete down, it gives you a better sense of what you're actually interested in rather than what you would like to be interested in. But this isn't a list of judgments. This is really thinking about what you want the game to be, taking those concrete things and turning it into what you want it to be and what would be fun for you, not this game is stupid, this game sucks. It's more along the lines of, I would have more fun if this game offered this, because I'm not enjoying that. And then from there, getting a sense of which playstyles you may be more inclined to, not the ones you want to be inclined to. Certainly, I've had that experience where I wake up one day going, holy shit, I'm a power gamer, and feeling bad about that. And it took me a while to kind of come to, no, at that phase of my life, I genuinely enjoyed. I was playing an Anarch at the time, so there was a lot of, and Drew could back me up on this. I mean, we killed a lot of characters during that time. But, we were actually adding something to the game because having these dangerous vampires around and people being scared of them added an element to the game that some people really felt was necessary. And ultimately, we did lose big, really, really big. But the thing is that we were contributing to the game, and how we were presenting that cultivator playstyle meant more than the fact that it wasn't we're a cultivator and they're bad. We weren't power gaming and they're bad. It was we're killing characters, but we're making sure the players understand what's going on. We're helping them with new characters. A lot of the characters we killed ended up joining our gang later, and we helped them out. We would talk a lot about what we worked things through, and we did a lot of compromises to make sure the game experience was awesome for them. So enjoying that and realizing this is what I genuinely like and not passing judgment on that is really key.
I think something similar to this was mentioned in the Storyteller's Companion for Vampire Revised, where you were talking about games in different settings almost, and how you should write and create your characters so that you can create something that wasn't necessarily a power gaming ploy,
right,
where you make, say, a 4th generation character. You're going for a different. Your player is telling you that they want a different experience.
Right.
Like they want to play, say, the Jihad. So you get 3D chess setups, and you try to scheme out the Jihad that way.
Certainly.
But it doesn't necessarily, depending on how much focus you put into making the numbers crunch on your character sheet, and how much I'll call it, how much socialites or how much acting you do and put into it.
Right, and a good example of this is on Facebook. I randomly came across a question. Someone was like, what is the best way to incorporate Mage the Ascension characters into a Guru LARP in a way that's respectful of both games? And my first reaction was, wait, really, you're doing that? But I realized these are people who are genuinely having a blast mixing mages and werewolves and asking an honest question of how can we make mages cool and werewolves cool in this dynamic. And so, you have to kind of push past that gut instinct saying, that's not the game I would play, but they're asking for help, and what about that experience is going to be amazing for them? So, not necessarily, I want to be a power gamer because we have werewolves and Guru and they'll kick each other's asses. They may have something completely different in mind, but just by phrasing it that way, you're going to have that. Some people are going to have a response of, oh, well, you're just cheesy power gamer. So again, it's that kind of finding the sweet spot of what are you genuinely wanting out of this game and putting aside the pre-notions of this is the game that it should be in my mind. So once you figure out what you want, not only as storytellers but also as players, it's good to find out what everybody else likes. Players, it's helpful to think about what kinds of scenes tend to happen around them. So, if you have a particular game style that you like, there's going to be certain scenes that happen around you on a regular basis because you like them. So thinking about what kinds of things happen around you is good to get a sense of what other players may or may not be liking by interacting with you. And for storytellers, it's a good way to poll players or to hold an open conversation about what players like and dislike, which ties back to discussion of the venue style sheets and constantly readjusting them. This venue style sheet was just a metaphor for actually having a conversation with players and saying, are you guys still having fun? Do we need to go in a different direction? Have people's tastes changed? Or have they become satisfied with a particular aspect of this game? So getting a constant assessment of what the players are actually liking, not what you believe they like, is very, very important. And again, it's really an attempt to look at what's actually there, not what you think is there, because it's very easy to get wrapped up in, well, this is how things should be. And once you have that information of what you like and what other players like, you can use that to identify areas of conflict. So if the players and storytellers really aren't aware of how everyone's having fun, that's where a lot of that conflict comes into play. If I think the game is about politics, but everyone comes to the game and they beat each other up, it's not that they don't get how the game is played, it's that they're not wanting to play a political game. They may be wanting to play a game where combat features a higher amount. And again, no place choice style is not wrong. Trying to impose that play style on others is actually what's wrong. So once you have that, help everyone get what they want. And this is something that's really less obvious for players and storytellers, but the reason why I think it's important specifically for large-scale live-action games is because players have just as much impact on the experience of the game as storytellers do. And this is one place where live-action games are unique and where characters like Socialite become prominent is because even in an MMO, the players to varying degrees can contribute to that experience, to almost none in games like, say, KOTOR, to very, very heavily in games like EVE Online. But still, there's a certain point where there's a wall hit. There's programming errors. The game just can't accommodate certain things. Those functions don't exist or they don't work the way you want them to. Whereas in a live-action game, players have had fantastic or miserable experiences and may never see a storyteller. Their experience and perceptions of the game, both Vampire the Masquerade or Vampire the Requiem in general, or of the Pacific Chronicle, can be made or broken by players. So players do have an important role in that, but it's less obvious to them to understand what impact they're having. So when you get to think about what you like in the game and what other people may like around you in the game, help you to kind of find, yes, thank you, I know, find ways to help players get what they want from the game. And if you give up something that you consider fun for the short term to help somebody else have fun during the game, then there's a implied reciprocity. There's an element that they want to kind of then give you back of some of what you enjoy down the road. But that's pretty complicated, and actually that entire concept is the whole thrust of my tomorrow panel, Playing to Lose. My cheap incentive to get you to come back tomorrow and watch the other half. But really the point is that there's a lot of interesting elements to giving up a little bit of what you want now for a lot later. But I mentioned feedback a couple of times, and there are different ways to get and actually use the feedback. I've found in the past that short feedback that's anonymous works the best. If you ask someone to fill out a 35-page questionnaire in triplicate with 5 forms and sign their name to it, you're going to get a very different level of response and say, what's going right, what's going wrong, how can we fix it? That's all I need. And I don't need to know who you are. So the shorter, easier way, if it takes me 5 minutes to answer and my name's not attached, I'm going to give you probably much more honest feedback than I have to be careful because so-and-so's going to read this and they're related to so-and-so and they may know that. No.
What if you know your players well enough to know who wrote what even times? And there's only like 6 of them.
Don't tell them. This is more for large scale. For smaller scale, at that point in time, honest conversations are usually better. Sitting with everybody in the room and saying, listen, we're not holding it against each other. Let's just sit and talk about how we can make this game better and what we're enjoying. For my tabletop games, for example, I do that a lot. It's like at the end of every session, it's like, I'm not going to give you experience points until I get at least one piece of feedback, good or negative, about how the game went. And then I give the reward after that. And so it does frame the experience points as a reward for feedback as opposed to game activities. So I'm still kind of working on that method, but it does mean every session is like going, well. And after a certain point, it gets rhythm where it's like going, you know what, everything's fine. And so at a certain point, the rhythm kind of hits in when I could pull back on the feedback. But especially at the start of a game, a shorter iterative feedback and just open conversation, dialogue with the players is probably more helpful until everyone kind of gets into a pattern. But as your game grows and swells, it gets like 15, 20 people, then having the shorter feedback with anonymous is probably going to be more helpful. Don't wait to get feedback. Go out and get it. If you sit there and say, oh, well, if they have a problem, they'll come tell me, they won't. I guarantee you they will not do it. So you have to say, hey guys, it's time for feedback. I need you to help me out. Again, the experience point is your friend. You can say, I'll give you 5 experience points if you give me feedback. You really need to be aggressive, especially as a storyteller, to get that, because people are not inclined to bring up bad news, and they're very uninclined to say they're having a good time because they assume that everyone knows that. So if you are waiting for feedback, the feedback you're going to get eventually is going to be things are catastrophically bad, or a very, very specific subsection of the game has a problem, and that's not really what you need. It's still useful, but what you really want is a holistic picture of what everybody in the game is liking, and so you have to go out and get that feedback as much as possible. The conversations involving the feedback should be productive, not judgmental. Lots of I statements. I feel the game would be better this way, not your game sucks. So finding ways to have the conversation thing, what can we do to get this to a solution for everyone, is a better conversational tactic than this game is ruined because Bobby keeps playing that damn gang roll. So it's certainly, and being open up front, saying, shutting down judgmental conversations and rewarding productive conversations, even if you don't agree with that line of thought, rewarding the patterns are going to help to get you a better level of feedback down the road and get people trained into a better style of conversation. And at the end, always get to action plans. After you have the conversation, we had this great 2-hour conversation about our game. Now what? So as you have these conversations and as you get the feedback, try to say, okay, based on the feedback I've compiled from everybody, it looks like everyone's really unhappy with the amount of combat, so I'm going to suggest that people now have to pay an experience point to initiate a combat with somebody else. So is that cool with everybody? And get discussion of the action points that we can directly apply to the game as soon as possible. Because theory is awesome, but if it's not making a demonstrable effect on the players, then they're going to feel like the entire conversation was wasted. And as part of that, playstyle types, as I mentioned before, are trends. These are not cookie-cutter player classes which people can easily fall into. Players do evolve over time, and they change from one playstyle to another. So again, we have to constantly reassess where your game is currently and where players are currently, rather than where you think they were 6 months ago or what you believe they to be. When things are in conflict, never assume you know what a player wants out of the scene. Even if this guy's been strongly about his character for the past 2 years, this might be the night where he really just wants to kill that guy, and you can't assume that you know what that guy wants out of the scene. So always ask, always engage. And so with that, any more questions? Yes?
How can I get a copy of this?
Absolutely. All my presentations are going to be on my website, eddyfate.com, eddyfate.com. Fate, yes.
Will your notes for this also be available?
Huh?
Will your notes for this also be available?
They're all in my head. But I will put the presentations up, and also I've been recording all the panels, so that will be audio files. Absolutely.
Now, you said that your experience mostly was with World of Darkness, Camarilla, and Mind's Eye.
I have had some Buffer LARP experience, and I've also tiny amount of experience with Nordic LARPs, but most of my 20 years of LARPs have been World of Darkness-ish, large-scale-ish style LARP. Yeah.
Do you find this stuff also is essential to really all LARP or all games?
I believe it is to varying different degrees. I believe that Buffer LARPs, depending on the Buffer LARP, tends much towards cultivator style, specifically of player skill, because more physically adept people are going to get a slight advantage, and that they're going to get rewarded for having that physical advantage. Different styles of Buffer LARPs do find ways to try to emphasize their play styles based on how they structure and organize their games. I played in Daggerhair predominantly for my life, and Daggerhair was really kind of scenario based. So it's like, okay, here's the scenario, here's the monsters, go. We do that for an hour. Okay, here's another scenario, we'll do that, go. So it's more like a PvP matches now in video games, or kind of player maps. And so that was pretty strongly cultivator style, but we still would sit down and role play and have a good time, but it's slanted in a certain direction. As we mentioned earlier, Nordic LARPs, Scandinavian-style LARPs tend to be strongly slanted towards the actor stance. But there are still people who are going to want to emphasize, okay, there's these minimal mechanics, but I still want to make sure those mechanics have the maximum benefit. Or, I really enjoy the people I've met in this game, and I want to get to know them more. And so I'm talking to them and getting these fascinating conversations. What my character is secondary, it's just an avatar to having these amazing conversations and experiences with people. So I do believe they are largely universal, but I find them to be more evenly distributed in the quote-unquote salon-style LARP than in the other different styles of action games.
I played a LARP in Michigan called Final Haven, and it started back in about 2000 or so. and with people who started off with like storyteller system games, who decided to run these LARPs, and it was much more heavily story-based, character-based, and over the last 7 or so years, it's heavily become more cultivator style of people wanting mechanics, and well, that's not balanced. We need to worry about the rules. Rules overshadow a lot of times the story. Do you think that that's also a change in population, or just who's coming into the games now, or is that just different groups?
I don't know. It's something I've been in the back of my head for a little while now. Because I mentioned I'm just now starting to play with Wormwood by Night, and so I'm seeing a lot of similar problems as well as some different problems from Mind's Eye Society. I'm starting to wonder if some of that isn't longevity. As the Chronicle goes on longer, I'm wondering if it naturally slants towards a cultivator style, because other styles will find their own way of having fun, but cultivators need more and more of those mechanic structure going forward to feel like they're meaningful. But I've not, that's just kind of a knee-jerk hypothesis. I have not actually sat down and done any real thinking about that point.
Because it's the newer people, a lot of newer people coming into the game, a lot of people, older people leaving the game for life reasons, 10, 15 years in. And the new people seem much more heavily based on the cultivator style. So.
I don't know about that, but I think it's more along the lines of this becomes this entrenchment of the way we've always done things. Communities will start to develop a history, and as they do, it becomes, we've always done it this way. And the sense of history and the sense of tradition becomes important. And in a live action game, I believe some of that tradition becomes enshrined in its rules. And so therefore, I think cultivator playstyles become more prominent, because when you have traditions as rules, people are going to want to maximize those rules. And so when I say, we've always done things this way, so now there's a rule for it, what I'm saying to the community at large is, this is what we consider important. We consider rules to be important, so we're focusing on this point. I don't think it's intentional, and I don't think it's even necessarily understood, but again, it's my kind of gut hypothesis that as you go longer, it's easier to fix a problem with rules than it is to fix a problem by talking to people. And so it's like, I can take 5 minutes to say, you can't play this anymore, rather than, why do you want to play this? So I think that's why that happens. But again, it's just their hypothesis. There.
So in your model, I'm confused about where narrativism went. Because it doesn't really seem to fit into the actor stance. That seems
narrativism kind of gets split, but really narrativism is very specific to tabletop games, because in a tabletop game, if we have 6 people around, we can all say, you know what, we all agree that we're not going to worry about this anymore. We're going to pull back and say, I'm going to give my character up and make a new character because the story would be awesome this way. And that kind of meta-level conversation is a lot harder to do in a live-action game, because there's just so many more people. I can't go to 500 people and say, okay, guys, we're all going to play this way now, it's cool. So that kind of gets...
So you have personal plots that they're trying to achieve.
Right, and that, I think, it's a little more supplemented into the socialite, to a degree, because they have the same instincts, which is like, I'm having a cool conversation, so you know what, my character normally wouldn't talk to slates, but you're a cool slate, so I'm just going to talk to you. And I'm making the on-the-fly decision to adjust my character to have that cool moment, which is where the core of narrativism really is, but it's not, it's one specific element of exploration, which is just character, as opposed to, I can't adjust the setting. We can't say, okay, vampires now all have penises in their forehead because it makes the game better for everybody. We can't make that decision.
Wait, what?
I didn't talk to you about your red lines, Justin.
What if I'm trying to curry favor with the prince, and so I go and talk to his retainer? That could be a narrative-driven behavior, not really a character.
But the problem is that also can be an actor stance, or it could be a cultivator stance, or it could even be a fixer stance. It could be any of those. Because it's like going, I need to talk to the prince, problem. I can't talk to the prince directly, solution. Talk to a subordinate, fixer, Or as opposed to, it would be cool if I could talk to the prince, so I'm going to find a way to make that happen. So I'm going to kind of, hey, my buddy plays the prince. Hey, can we set up a character tie so I can ultimately talk to the prince? We're stepping out of the game to change things, add a new character tie. That's a different stance, and that's a little more kind of a socialite, maybe a little bit of actor. But things that narrativism doesn't break down well.
Player stances rather than game master stance.
Right.
Okay. So the game master stance, even with a LARP, can still have a narrativist twist, because you're trying to look at overall themes.
Right, and that's the thing is that Ron Edwards' model is really more, it was really intended to be a design model for designers to make, but it does map, people have mapped it correctly and incorrectly to player styles, but it was more the fact that in a live action game there is a little bit of that element, which is why I thought it was important to look at that and see what he was trying to do with that model. And I think narrativism, I think there's also an undercurrent of narrativism in general through live action, large scale games, because we're all our audience as well as our actors. And so it's like, you know, the kind of game that we ultimately project to new players or to people just walking in is going to make a huge stance that storyteller may have no impact on. So there is some undercurrents of that in live action inherently. But I don't think there's any kind of explicit player style to it. These players are going to do narrativistic stuff more than other players. So it's important to note it, but it does not map well, you're correct. And I think that's the nature of having only a certain amount of player power in this style.
3 o'clock.
Yeah.
I had another question. Like one-shots. My company does games for cons like Origins and
Mm-hmm.
Con. They're all one-shots. They're pre-gen characters.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had our players who love their character so much.
They come back next year and.
But how do you do like in the games that are happening here? They're pre-gens.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you give a pre-gen to one of the 4 archetypes? I mean.
Well, that's actually an interesting point. Is making pre-gens for those in mind. So going, hey, are you a cultivator? Okay, I'm going to give you a character with lots of cool dots and cool powers to play with, and some character goals to encourage you to go use those powers and stuff on other people. For people who are fixers, a character that's like a detective style. Hey, here's some mysteries you can go dig into and solve. Actors making kind of elaborate backgrounds with interesting character twists and socialites just reasons to be a social butterfly. You can certainly make pre-gens along those lines and then explicitly tell players, do you like these kind? One of the 4 things in a game. Do you like A, B, C, or D? Okay, you like C. Okay, let's pull a character out of the C file, boom, and give them something like that. So I think it's possible to do that with the understanding that also players don't always know, if they're not trained to do this, they may not know what they like. And I think this is an RPG thing, but no one's really going to come to you and say, I really want to beat shit up. It's pretty uncommon to hear that. It's getting more common, I think, but I know that in certain of the communities, it's very much a stigma of like, oh, you beat stuff up, well, then here, we'll give you like an Anglo character, I guess. They're kind of sneering looks. So, I mean, encouraging people and finding different ways to phrase it is like less combat and more, do you like to play with cool powers? May help to kind of lessen some of the stigma on that point and still get the cultivators to actually find games they enjoy. Okay, with that, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.